Basically, the proposition here is take the world's most dangerous substance and a lot of money and then work out how
what
to
to
deal
do with it
with it.
later.
But we invented the hills hoist and the stump jump plough. So I've got faith.
G'day and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast demystifying the big economic issues in Australia and putting them in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and in episode 10 of Follow the Money, our Chief Economist Richard Dennis and Director of Research Rod Campbell join me to talk about a dump, specifically the proposed nuclear waste dump for South Australia.
One for Mum, one for Dad, one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be in Australia.
Dead, buried, cremated.
Australia's basically done for. We'll just end up being a third-rate economy. You know, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
Our judgment is that the best way forward is to restore that trust by putting the decision in the hands of people, not parties, not politicians.
The South Australian Premier, Jay Weatherill, has this week announced he wants to hold a referendum so that the people of South Australia can decide whether the state should host a waste dump for nuclear waste from around the world.
How did we get here? I mean, it depends how far back you want to go. Let me read a quote to you from the Adelaide Advertiser, and you can guess what year this was written in. You ready? It must be seen by any moderate-thinking person that the radium mining field of Olari in South Australia must eventually become the greatest and richest mining centre of the globe. And the sooner the Commonwealth Government awake to this fact, the sooner will be the positive prominence of Australia be recognised by the nations of the world.
I'm not quite sure your accent was consistent through there, but
I'm sorry,
I admire your...
The accent was there to give you a hint.
And what year was that, Rod?
That was written in the Advertiser in 1913.
Wow.
So,
How's it going?
well, I mean, I assume you've heard of Olari in South Australia?
It's the centre of the globe.
Yeah. Look, there has been a long history of nuclear stuff in South Australia, going back to those initial early days of nuclear physics and technology.
The pre-aeroplane era.
The pre-aeroplane era. Once we got into the aeroplane era and we started dropping nuclear bombs on people, of course, the British decided that South Australia would be a great place to test theirs. And so Maralinga in the northwest of the state had several British atomic bomb tests done there with ongoing issues for health of local traditional owners. So nuclear issues are not new or unheard of in South Australia.
There are also two active uranium mines in South Australia, Olympic Dam at Roxby Downs and the Beverley Mine in the northeast of the state. In 2015, the state government launched a royal commission to look at the entire nuclear industry, from mining to nuclear power to nuclear waste. The Royal Commission into the nuclear fuel cycle recommended that South Australia build a nuclear waste facility, simplify the process to build more uranium mines, and lobby the federal government to allow nuclear power plants in Australia.
And it recommended that South Australia establish an international nuclear waste dump. Hurrah!
Just like everyone's always wanted.
What does South Australia get out of it?
The exciting possibility of the world's first commercial nuclear waste dump, where other countries would pay South Australia to dispose of the high-level nuclear waste, not the old X-ray films. And
the smaller,
the medical
easier to
stuff,
deal with stuff.
The stuff that comes out of other countries' nuclear reactors. The Royal Commission found that not only was South Australia a good place for that, but that were South Australia to pursue it, it would be enormously profitable.
How profitable?
Gross profits, total profits of around $100 billion.
Whoa.
Oh, but don't get ahead of yourself. That would be exaggerating it. If we express that in today's dollars, because this would come over many years, it's $51 billion sitting on the table, just waiting for a South Australian government to pick it up.
Great.
So we were going to have to spend a mere $145 billion to dig this hole.
It's a pretty big hole.
It's a good hole.
It's world-leading hole.
Cutting edge hole. $145 billion hole for about $250 billion worth of money for the waste we would take to put in there.
You were saying that's over several years. What's the kind of span of this project?
Well, the waste needs to be safely stored for a couple of 100,000 years. Don't worry about that.
No problem.
That's why we need a cutting edge hole.
That's why we need the cutting edge $145
Not much has
billion
happened
hole.
in the last 100,000 or so years.
That's longer than humans have so far existed out of Africa. What if Neanderthals had nuclear power?
If they had a nuclear waste left over from their process for nuclear energy, we'd still be managing their waste as well.
Thanks to Today Tonight Adelaide for that history lesson. It's a good point. The last 100,000 years includes basically the whole of human history as we know it, the rise and fall of every ancient civilization. So 100,000 years minimum is a long time to look after something as dangerous to human health as nuclear waste.
But the plan, and I use the term loosely, but the plan put forward by the Royal Commissioner would see South Australia start to land high-level nuclear waste in South Australia well before a site for the whole had been identified.
So you start importing the waste first.
Oh, yeah, because the money
And then you
comes
dig the hole.
with the waste.
Okay.
And then after the waste starts to show up, we start to identify a site. And then we have to start to build a deep underground geological storage of a size and design that's never been built before. And that's going to take decades.
That's kind of an important point, isn't it? Permanent geological storage or dumping, however you want to call it, has actually never been done.
No.
Anywhere in the world.
No.
Finland's kind of close, but they're still a few years away from putting anything underground themselves.
And 40 years from starting.
Plenty of other people have tried and failed. The US has had a couple of goes, didn't go so well. So basically the proposition here is take the world's most dangerous substance and a lot of money and then work out how
What to do
deal
with it
with
later.
But we invented the hills hoist and the stump jump plough. So I've got faith. And so did the Royal Commissioner. And it's not actually until about 110 years after the project starts that the last tonne of nuclear waste would be buried below ground. So for
So
around
at least 100 years.
For 100 years, there would be high-level nuclear waste stored above ground in the intriguingly titled interim facility.
Yeah,
Now,
because when I think 100 years, I think interim.
well, that's about how old our federation is.
Yeah.
So I guess if Australia's an interim country, then this would be an interim high-level above-ground waste site.
Listeners might be getting the idea that this isn't such a good idea.
Skeptics.
And so what they need is a good dose of economic modelling.
Oh, yes.
Our favourite.
And as we've learned on Follow the Money, that when there is economic modelling around, the first things we need to ask are how good's the data and what are the assumptions?
How good was the data and what are the assumptions in the model?
Well, the first bit of data you want in any economic model is what's the price? And there's a bit of a problem there because there's no market for this. It doesn't exist yet. There's no market for nuclear waste. You can't get online and think, ooh, I wonder what the nuclear waste price is today.
What about eBay? Maybe you could look on eBay. Well, they came up with what they call proxies, which were things that aren't prices, but they thought maybe might be near prices. But if we in Australia are competing with other countries in the provision of deep holes, then countries will pay whoever will do it the cheapest. The fact that they might be willing to pay more is kind of good to know, but to assume that that's the price they'll end up paying is, well, we use the term heroic when we're trying to sound polite about economists.
So the assumption is essentially that Australia will be the monopoly provider and that there'll be no other competition. That once we're raking in the hundreds of billions of dollars, that no one else...
No, they'll just sit there going, man, if only we'd have thought of a hole.
No, to be precise in the modelling and to be fair, they did consider that Australia might get different amounts of the waste in the world but not that another country would try and undercut us on price.
Mm-hmm.
So other countries might dispose of their own waste, but their assumption was that there would be no competitor in the traded waste.
Yeah, that no one would come along and say, hey, Kazakhstan can put this underground at $600,000 a tonne. Why on earth would I pay South Australia $1.75 million?
Or the Ukraine.
And so we just went along and asked them. I went to the Ukraine embassy. I did ask Ambassador Kulinich, would the Ukraine be willing to pay South Australia to take its nuclear waste? And he laughed at me. We have a very good place for nuclear waste in the Ukraine. You might have heard of it. It's called Chernobyl.
Economists would say they have a comparative advantage in disposing of waste, unfortunately for them.
Yeah, and what do you know? They've already started building waste facilities there. So this assumption of the economic model that no one else is going to come in and compete on price, that would fail first-year economics.
We in economics can't predict the price of oil in 3 months' time. We know that we can't make long-run forecasts about price, even when we've got 100 years of old data. So for any economist to say, well, we've forecast the price over the next 100 years for a product that's never been sold, well, forecast would be a word I wouldn't use.
If you take my tonne of nuclear waste here, I'll give you a set of steak knives and some money. It just doesn't exist.
How much would you pay for all these items? Well, we'll even give you the set of 6 precision steak knives. And to make the offer completely irresistible, you'll get this unique spiral slicer.
So who actually wrote the report on this?
Well, that's a fabulous question, Ebony, and it turns out that the economic assessment of this was certainly co-written by paid advocates for nuclear industry lobby groups.
So no conflict of interest there then?
Not according to the Royal Commissioner.
Oh no. Dear.
The Royal Commission has made a recommendation about building a nuclear waste dump based on a report written by the President and Vice President of a lobby group for the development of nuclear waste storage facilities internationally. Dr. Charles McCombie and Neil Chapman are consultants for MCM, who also head up the lobby group ARIUS, which is short for the Association for Regional and International Underground Storage. Dr. McCombie told ABC's Stephen Long in a statement that there was no conflict of interest. The head of the Royal Commission, Rear Admiral Kevin Scarce, also told Stephen Long he saw no conflict of interest.
I think it's important that we engage people who understand the issues so that we get a realistic view of what the challenges and the opportunities might be.
Dr. McCombie has been in the nuclear waste game for a long time. In the 90s, he was a senior manager with Pangaea Resources Australia, an international conglomerate which sought to build a nuclear waste dump in Australia. James Voss, the former managing director of Pangaea Resources, also appeared as an expert witness to the Royal Commission. So after they were chased out of Australia in the 90s by a public rejection of nuclear waste, it seems for these consultants, no means not yet.
Not only are these people paid nuclear industry advocates, but they have been here before. They proposed exactly the same concept in Western Australia in the 1990s.
And they didn't jump on it?
No. So Pangaea was a company that, as Rod said, was proposing a big waste dump in Western Australia. They kept their plans to themselves. They worked on it for many years. It's estimated they spent up to $600 million getting ready. But before the big reveal, someone leaked their plans.
Oh.
This is the fun bit. They leaked the video cassette. The VHS cassette.
All these considerations lead to the conclusion that Australia can provide the best world site for a geological repository for nuclear materials. And Pangaea is an organisation devoted to promoting a safe world solution to the problem.
Once it was revealed that foreign companies were secretly planning a nuclear waste dump in Australia, Australian politicians were quick to rule it out. So the company, Pangaea, some of its key personnel in winding up that enterprise set up this lobby group called ARIUS the president and vice president of which have now surfaced as the...
And also consulting to the Royal Commission.
Consulting to the Royal Commission and co-authors of key economic chapters. So while the Royal Commissioner is adamant that one consultant's report was enough, if you're going to buy a fridge, you'd probably get a couple of quotes.
Yeah.
If you're going to spend $145 billion, I think a couple of quotes would be a bare minimum.
And amazingly, this time round, rather than a company paying the millions and millions for its own PR sales pitch, astonishingly, we've got a Royal Commission that's doing it at taxpayers' expense.
After the Royal Commission handed down its recommendations, the South Australian government set up not one but two citizens' juries, one to examine the findings of the Royal Commission and another to discuss the merits of building a nuclear waste dump.
The first citizens' jury into the nuclear fuel cycle.
Demonstrators swarmed Jay Weatherill as he arrived at the first meeting of the citizens'
jury of 350 people will then be used to...
350 randomly selected South Australians gave up 3 of their weekends to work it out. Both Rod and Richard appeared before the citizens' jury to explain the economic case behind the nuclear waste dump. And the citizens' jury overwhelmingly rejected the idea.
2/3 of them, 70% of them, said that under no circumstances should this proposal be carried forward.
In fact, don't even keep investigating it.
Yeah, enough.
Stop right now.
You've had $10 million on a Royal Commission. You've gone and collected the data that was meant to help us make this decision. We've looked at it. We've heard from experts that the juries themselves called in, experts nominated by the government, and 350 citizens willing to give their weekends up said enough already. But I don't know that the Premier's really listened to them this week, has he, Rod?
No, well, 82% of them, even those that were open to the idea of the nuclear waste dump, 82% of these people thought that the economics of it didn't stack up.
That from the very beginning, even the Royal Commissioner has effectively said, no one really wants a nuclear waste dump. But boy, look at all of the money. So I think the economics is really important for this particular conversation, not because the environmental and social consequences of poisoning the earth for 100,000 years are trivial, but because even the proponents have said all along, you only do this because there's so much money to be made. And what no one's really asked South Australians yet is, well, what would you like to see?
Yeah.
They haven't been asked what their vision for South Australia is. They've been asked, should they have a dump or shouldn't they?
So now, despite a big fat no from the citizens' jury, the South Australian Premier Jay Weatherill is going to ask the question one more time, just in case people weren't really listening. His government will hold a plebiscite to ask, do you want to have a nuclear waste dump in your backyard?
If the South Australian government is willing to spend $145 billion on a 100% publicly owned nuclear waste dump, if they've got that appetite, that optimism for what the public sector can do, if they're willing to borrow that amount of money for infrastructure and investment, well, they could turn South Australia into anything they wanted. So I think the main thing is not to be railroaded in, do you want a dump or do you want nothing? I think the real thing they have to demand is an honest conversation about how to make the state a better place. And if building a nuclear waste dump comes out on top, then have a referendum about it.
Yeah.
But don't start the conversation with dump or no dump.
Just beware of economists waving around 200-page reports that say, just sign here and you could have $100 billion.
But only if you're quick.
That's been episode 10 of Follow the Money, brought to you by the Australia Institute. You can subscribe on iTunes or find previous episodes on the Australia Institute website at tai.org.au/podcasts. Richard Dennis's book Econobabble is available now from redbackquarterly.com.au, or you can find it on Amazon and in all good bookshops. You can follow Richard on Twitter at rdns_tai. You can find Rod's papers on our website or follow him at r_o_d_c. You can follow me at ebony_Bennett with a double N double T, or the Australia Institute at the Oz Institute with an AUS. This episode was produced by Jennifer Macy. Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum composed our title track. and you can find more of his music at pulseandthrum.com. Thanks for listening.